The old man's hand on my shoulder was the first time anyone had touched me with kindness in what felt like 100 years, and I almost flinched away before I understood what was happening. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He wasn't trying to startle me out of whatever spiral I had been falling through. He was just standing there with his calloused, weathered hand resting on my coat, looking at me the way you look at someone you have been thinking about for a long time. And what he was about to say was 7 words I will be turning over in my head until the day I die. But before I tell you what he said, I have to tell you what kind of day had brought me to that bench at the end of the Erie Basin Marina Pier in Buffalo, New York, at 11:23 p.m. on a Tuesday in November of 2025, because that bench was not a coincidence. That bench was the last available seat on a route I had been traveling since 7:00 a.m. that morning, and every stop on that route had taken something from me that I had believed, in the foolish way that men believe such things, was permanent. 7:42 a.m. that morning. The 4th-floor conference room at Haverson Logistics on Delaware Avenue. The company where I had started as a regional sales coordinator at 31, where I had worked my way up to director of client accounts over 18 years, where I had a corner office, a parking spot with my name stenciled on the asphalt, and a Christmas bonus structure that I had quietly used to plan my retirement at 62. The man sitting across from me was named Brennan Sittler. He was 33 years old. He had joined the company 9 months earlier as Chief Revenue Officer, parachuted in from a private equity firm in Chicago that had purchased a majority stake in Haverson and had been quietly restructuring it ever since. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my mortgage, a wristwatch that probably cost more than my car, and an expression that was meant to look regretful but landed somewhere closer to bored. "Holden, the strategic realignment is complete, and I'm afraid your role is being absorbed into the new structure. This isn't about you. Your numbers have been solid. This is purely an architectural decision." "When?" "Today, effective immediately. Liesel from HR will walk you through the paperwork after we finish here." 18 years, Brennan. "I'm aware. The severance package reflects your tenure. 12 weeks of base salary, continuation of medical through January, and outplacement services if you choose to use them. 12 weeks. 18 years of arriving before the sun came up to chase shipments through customs, working through Thanksgiving when a freight contract was bleeding, training every account manager who had ever rotated through my department. 18 years of being the one they called when the wheels came off, and Brennan Sittler was compressing that into 12 weeks and a list of resume coaches I was apparently expected to be grateful for. I asked him if there was anything I could do. He told me there wasn't. He told me it was already decided 2 weeks ago. He told me Liesel was waiting outside the door. Liesel walked me out at 8:14 a.m. They let me load a cardboard banker's box with the contents of my office. A framed photograph of Cordelia and Sawyer at the lake the summer before, a glass paperweight my wife Marlena had given me on our 10th anniversary, a desk plant I had been keeping alive since 2019, and a Haverson Logistics commemorative pen I had received for my 15-year anniversary that I had never once written with. They took my key card. They took my parking pass. They did not shake my hand. I sat in my Subaru Outback in the parking garage for over an hour. I didn't cry. Holden Marsh is not a man who cries in parking garages. I just sat there listening to the ventilation fans hum in the concrete ceiling, watching my own breath fog the windshield, feeling the specific and unmistakable weightlessness of a man whose entire professional identity has been canceled like a magazine subscription somebody else forgot to renew. I drove home at 10:00 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, which is something a man with a job has never done in his life. The streets of Buffalo at that hour belonged to retirees and stay-at-home parents and delivery drivers and people on disability. And as I drove down Elmwood Avenue toward our house in the Parkside neighborhood, I felt like a trespasser in a world that had been running perfectly well without me for 18 years. I noticed things I had never noticed before. The woman walking a yellow Labrador in front of the coffee shop on Bidwell. The 2 kids on bicycles with no helmets cutting through the alley behind the Greek diner. The middle-aged man sitting on the steps of the Episcopal Church reading a paperback book in the cold. People with time. People with their own routes through a Tuesday morning. People who I would now apparently be joining whether I wanted to or not. Marlena's Volvo was in the driveway when I pulled up. That was the first surprise. She was supposed to be at the dental practice in Williamsville where she had been the office manager for the past 6 years. She did not come home for lunch. She did not come home in the middle of the day for any reason. The driveway being occupied at 10:34 a.m. on a Tuesday was a wrong note in a song I had been hearing the same way for nearly 2 decades, and I felt it in my chest before I had any conscious idea what it meant. I walked in through the side door, the way I always did. The kitchen was quiet. 2 suitcases were sitting upright next to the breakfast bar. Marlena was at the counter, holding a mug of tea, looking at me the way a person looks at someone they have already finished a long conversation with internally and is now waiting to deliver the conclusion of. Her hair was pulled back. She was wearing a sweater I had bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. She looked in a way I had not seen her look in a long time, calm. "Holden, we need to talk. Marlena, I got let go this morning." "I know. You know." Brennan called me on Friday. The room did not tilt the way rooms tilt in books. It did something quieter than that. It just became, all at once, a room I did not recognize. A kitchen I had cooked breakfast in 5,000 times that suddenly felt like a stage set in a play I had been cast in without auditioning. "Brennan called you on Friday. His wife Ainsley and I have been friendly for a while. He wanted to give me a heads up so that I could make my own arrangements before the news became official." "Your own arrangements?" "Holden, I have been planning to leave for a long time. The timing of your job has actually accelerated my thinking, but it has not changed it. I was going to tell you over the weekend. I waited until Tuesday because my attorney advised me that filing while you were still officially employed would have complicated the support calculations. Once Brennan told me you would be terminated by 10 this morning, it became clear that today was the right day to do this. She had an attorney. She had a strategy. She had timed her departure to the morning of my firing with the precision of a freight schedule, and the man who had spent 18 years building freight schedules for a living was the one who had not seen any of it coming. "Where are the kids?" "They're at my mother's house in Amherst. I brought them there yesterday. I told them on Sunday night." "You told the kids on Sunday." "Holden, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I have a moving truck arriving at 4:00 p.m. for the larger items. My attorney's name is Patris Halloran. She'll be in touch with whoever you decide to retain. I am not going to argue about the house. I am not going to argue about the cars. I have already moved what I needed to move." "Why?" She set the mug down on the counter. She looked at me the way you look at a wall that has been there for a long time and that you are about to walk through for the last time. "Because I'm tired of being the only adult in this marriage." "Marlena, no. Let me finish, because I have rehearsed this, and if you interrupt me, I will have to start over, and neither of us deserves that. I'm tired, Holden. I'm tired of being the one who plans the vacations and remembers the birthdays and signs the permission slips and calls the plumber and makes the dentist appointments and writes the Christmas cards. I'm tired of being married to a man whose entire personality is his job, and now that the job is gone, I am not going to stay around to watch you figure out who you were supposed to be all along. I told myself for years that you would wake up, that you would notice me, that you would notice the children. You never did. You came home, you ate dinner, you answered email, you went to bed. For 18 years, and I am 46 years old, Holden. I do not have another 18 years to give to a man who is using me as the operations manager of his own life. I stood in my kitchen and listened to my wife describe the past 2 decades of our marriage as a job she was resigning from. I did not interrupt. I did not defend myself. I did not, in that moment, have access to whichever part of a person generates defense, because that part of me had been used up at 7:42 that morning in a conference room on the 4th floor of a building I would never enter again. "Cordelia and Sawyer," I said. "I want to see them." "You can see them on Saturday. My mother's address is in your phone. I'm asking you for this week to give them some space. They knew this was coming, Holden. They've known for months. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because I don't want you to walk into my mother's house on Saturday thinking you're going to surprise them with the news. They already know. They've been processing it. They love you, but they are tired too. Please, Saturday." She picked up one of the suitcases. She walked past me into the garage. I heard the trunk of the Volvo open. I heard the suitcase go in. I heard her come back for the second one. I did not move from where I was standing next to the breakfast bar. She put on her coat. She picked up her purse. She stopped at the door that led from the kitchen to the mudroom, and she turned back one more time. The locks aren't changing. The house is yours. I'll let you know when the movers are coming for the rest of the furniture I want. Take care of yourself, Holden." Then she left. The Volvo backed out of the driveway. I heard the brakes catch slightly the way they always did at the bottom of the slope, and then I heard her drive away down Summit Avenue, and that was the sound of 19 years of marriage exiting my life with the same small mechanical noise it had been making every weekday morning since 2007. I walked through the house. The living room looked normal. The dining room looked normal. The hallway looked normal. But Cordelia's bedroom upstairs was nearly empty. The books were gone from her shelves. The clothes were gone from her closet. The photographs of her and her friends from the high school theater program were gone from her corkboard. Sawyer's room was the same. His Lego sets, his soccer trophies, his blue weighted blanket that he had needed since he was 6 to fall asleep. All gone. She had taken the children's lives out of the house piece by piece in the days I had been at the office staying late to chase a freight contract that had been used as the cover story for my own termination. I sat on the edge of Sawyer's empty bed for a long time. I did not cry. I did not know what to do with my hands. I tried to call my brother Wade in Pittsburgh at 2:00 p.m. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail that I do not remember the content of and that I have never asked him to play back to me. I tried to call my best friend from college, a man named Reggie Lindquist who had been the best man at my wedding and who now lived in Charlotte working for a bank. He answered. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said the words that people say when they have no idea what to say. "Holden, I am so sorry. I wish I knew what to tell you." "Hang in there." I told him I would, and I hung up, and I understood in a way I had not understood before that the friendships of middle-aged men are mostly maintained by women, and that without Marlena coordinating dinners and group trips and birthday cards, my own social architecture was a building with the load-bearing walls already removed. I did not call my parents. My father, Edmund, was 78 years old and had a heart condition. My mother, Constance, was 76 and had been diagnosed with the early stages of dementia the previous spring. They lived in a retirement community in Sarasota, Florida, and they had loved Marlena like a daughter, and I could not begin to imagine the conversation that would involve telling them that the woman they had taken on cruises with us for 19 years had moved her things out of our house while I was being fired. That conversation would have to happen eventually. It was not going to happen on Tuesday. I sat in the kitchen until the light through the window went orange and then gray. I made myself a sandwich at some point and ate half of it and threw the other half away. I drank a glass of water. I drank another glass of water. I tried to remember what people did when they were no longer employed and no longer married, and I realized I had no template. Every model of a man I had grown up watching, my father, my uncles, the men in my church, had been employed and married. I did not know how to be the other thing. At 9:00 p.m., I put on my coat. I could not stay in the house. I considered driving to my mother-in-law's house in Amherst, but Marlena had asked me not to, and a part of me, the part that had still loved her at 7:00 that morning, did not want to embarrass her in front of our children on a Tuesday night by showing up unannounced and broken. I considered driving to a hotel, but I did not want to be seen by a desk clerk. I considered driving to a bar, but I had never been a drinker, and I knew that starting at 49 years old in a state of total collapse was not a habit I wanted to pick up. I drove to the waterfront. I do not know why. Buffalo is a city built around a lake and a river, and there is a place where the river meets the lake at the end of a long pier in the Erie Basin Marina that I had taken Marlena to on our second date in 2005, when we were still strangers to each other, and the cold November wind off the water had made her tuck her hand into the inside of my coat sleeve for warmth. I had not been to that pier in probably 10 years. I did not know what I was going to do when I got there. I just drove. The marina parking lot was nearly empty. There was one other car, a maroon pickup truck of a vintage that suggested its owner had bought it new and never replaced it. The wind off Lake Erie at that hour in November is a particular kind of cold that does not feel like weather. It feels like a force. I walked the length of the pier with my hands in my coat pockets and my collar turned up, and I sat down on a wooden bench at the very end of the concrete walkway, and I looked at the water. The water was black. That is the only honest way to describe it. Lake Erie in November at 11 o'clock at night, with the moon hidden behind clouds and the wind coming straight across the open water from Canada, is not the friendly recreational lake of summer photographs. It is something older than that. It is a body of water that has swallowed ships and fishermen and lost children, and it does not pretend at that hour to be anything other than what it is. I sat on the bench and I looked at it and I did not have a plan. I want to be honest with you about that. I want to be honest because I think there is a kind of dishonesty in the way men tell stories like this where they leave out the part where the wind was very cold and the water was very close and the bench was a long way out on a concrete pier with no one else around. And the day had been the kind of day where a man might reasonably ask himself questions that he had never asked himself before. I am not saying I had a plan. I am saying I sat on a bench at the end of a pier at the end of the worst day of my life, and I was not in a hurry to get up, and I was not sure where I would go if I did. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough for my hands to stop being cold and start being numb. Long enough for the lights of the small boats moored along the breakwater to become the only thing I could see clearly. Long enough that when the footsteps came down the pier behind me, I did not turn around because I assumed they were a marina security guard who was going to tell me the pier was closed after dark, and that I needed to leave. And a part of me welcomed the interruption and another part of me resented it, and most of me was too tired to do anything about either feeling. The footsteps stopped behind the bench. I felt rather than saw that whoever it was had come to a halt directly behind my shoulder. There was no greeting. There was no clearing of the throat. There was just the sense of another human standing in the wind in November at the end of a pier, the way I was standing, except that this person had walked the length of the pier to find me. And then I felt his hand. A right hand, large and weathered, with the particular weight of a hand that has done physical work for a long time. It landed on my right shoulder through the fabric of my coat, and it stayed there. Not a grip, not a tap, a weight. The weight of a hand placed deliberately and without explanation on the shoulder of a stranger. I should have flinched. I should have stood up and asked him what he wanted. I should have done any of the things that men sitting alone on a pier at midnight are supposed to do when a stranger walks up behind them and touches them. I did none of those things. I sat very still and I did not turn my head, and I waited because something about the weight of that hand told me that whatever was about to happen was not a threat. It was something else. He spoke. His voice was rough, low, the voice of a man who had smoked for 30 years and quit 20 years ago. "Stand up. You're not done yet, son." 7 words. 7 plain English words spoken in the wind at the end of a concrete pier on Lake Erie at 11:23 at night, and I have replayed them in my head several thousand times in the months since, and I cannot tell you exactly why they did to me what they did. I can only tell you that I stood up. I did not ask him who he was. I did not ask him why he had walked out onto a freezing pier at midnight to find a stranger. I stood up because the hand on my shoulder belonged to someone who had decided I was getting off that bench, and I did not have it in me to argue. I turned around and I looked at him for the first time. He was a tall man, taller than I would have expected from the voice, maybe 6'2" in his middle 70s. He was wearing a heavy wool coat the color of charcoal and a knit cap pulled down over his ears, and the parts of his face I could see were the face of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors or in shops. White stubble along the jaw, pale gray eyes set deep under heavy brows, a nose that had been broken at least once a long time ago and never set quite right. His hands were ungloved despite the cold, and the right hand that had been on my shoulder a moment before was now hanging at his side, and I could see in the marina lights that the knuckles were swollen and the fingers were thick the way the fingers of carpenters and mechanics and stonemasons are thick after 50 years of use. "My name is Heinrich Das," he said. "Most people call me Hank. I have a truck in the parking lot. I am going to ask you to walk back down the pier with me and get in the truck. I am not going to hurt you. I am not going to take you anywhere you do not want to go. I am going to take you to a diner on Niagara Street about 4 minutes from here, and I am going to buy you a piece of pie and a cup of coffee, and I am going to ask you some questions. If at any point you want me to take you back to your own vehicle, I will. Does that work for you?" I should tell you that nothing about this proposition made sense. A 76-year-old stranger had walked the length of an empty pier in the middle of the night to deliver a sentence to me and was now offering to drive me to a diner. I should have said no. I should have asked him 1,000 questions before getting into a vehicle with him. Instead, I nodded. I do not have a good explanation for the nodding. I can only tell you that the alternative was the bench, and the bench had been worse than I am comfortable admitting. We walked back down the pier together without speaking. He matched my pace, which was slow. The wind was at our backs now, pushing us toward the parking lot. The maroon pickup truck I had noticed earlier was his. It was a 1994 Ford F-150 in remarkable condition, the kind of truck that has been washed and waxed by the same set of hands every Saturday for 30 years. He opened the passenger door for me. The interior smelled like cedar shavings and old leather and a faint trace of pipe tobacco that had probably last been smoked in that cab during the Clinton administration. He drove me to a place called Tully's Diner on Niagara Street, 4 minutes north of the marina, the way he had said. It was a small 24-hour place with a counter and 7 booths and a chalkboard advertising the pie of the day. Hank held the door open for me. He nodded to a woman behind the counter who was somewhere in her late 50s, and she nodded back the way people nod at each other when they have been nodding at each other across the same counter for many years. He led me to a booth in the back corner and slid into the seat across from me without taking off his coat. The waitress came over. "Hank, Margaret, 2 coffees, 2 slices of whatever you've got that's freshest, and give us a few minutes." Margaret looked at me for a brief second, the way waitresses in diners look at strangers who are sitting across from regulars at midnight, and then she walked back to the counter without saying anything else. Hank put his elbows on the table and folded his hands together and looked at me. In the fluorescent light of the diner, I could see his face properly for the first time. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow. There was a wedding ring on his left hand, an old one, the gold rubbed flat on the inside surface. He was a man who had been married for a long time, and the way he was wearing the ring at his age told me his wife was no longer alive. "What's your name?" he said. "Holden Marsh." "Holden Marsh. Tell me, Holden Marsh, what did this Tuesday take from you?" "I want to tell you that I held something back. I want to tell you that I evaluated this stranger across the table from me and decided, with the careful judgment of a 49-year-old corporate director, exactly how much to share with him. I did not. I told him everything. The firing at 7:42, the conference room, the 12 weeks of severance. Brennan Sittler and his Chicago suit, the drive home, Marlena standing in the kitchen with 2 suitcases at her feet. The fact that she had been planning her exit with Brennan's wife for months, the kids already at her mother's, the empty bedrooms upstairs, the fact that I had no friends I could call, the fact that I had not called my parents because my mother has dementia and I could not begin to construct a sentence that would survive the trip from Buffalo to Sarasota. Hank did not interrupt me. He did not nod sympathetically. He did not make the small, comforting noises that people make in their throats when they want you to know that they are listening. He just sat there with his elbows on the table and his hands folded and his pale, gray eyes on my face, and he let me talk until I ran out of things to say. When I finally stopped, he sat for a long moment in silence, and then he reached up and removed his knit cap and laid it on the seat beside him, and the top of his head was bald and pale and slightly mottled the way the heads of old men are. "Holden, I'm going to tell you why I came down that pier tonight. I came down that pier tonight because I come down that pier every Tuesday night, and I have been coming down that pier every Tuesday night for 33 years. My son Theo took his own life in the cold water about 200 yards east of where you were sitting on the 17th of August in 1992. He was 26 years old. He was an addict. He had been clean for 14 months. He relapsed. He went down to the marina on a Tuesday because Tuesday was the night he and I used to take an old Lyman cruiser out together when he was a boy, and he stepped off the end of that pier into the water, and the Coast Guard recovered him 3 days later about a mile west of the Bird Island Pier. I go down there on Tuesday nights because that is the time he chose, and I have not missed a Tuesday in 33 years except the 2 when I had pneumonia in 2008. I have walked the length of that pier in every kind of weather Buffalo can throw at a man, and I have seen many things on that bench over the years, and I have learned to tell the difference between a man who is sitting on a bench and a man who is sitting on a bench. I did not know what to say to that. I had not known when I sat down on that bench that I was sitting in a place that was already, for someone else, a memorial. I am not going to ask you what you were thinking on that bench, Holden. I do not need to know. I am going to tell you what I saw, which is a man dressed for an office in a coat that was not warm enough for the wind. sitting at the end of a pier at 11 o'clock at night, with his hands in his lap, looking at the water in the particular way that I have seen men look at the water before, and I have not always been able to walk down the pier in time. Tonight I was. Margaret arrived at the table with 2 coffees and 2 slices of apple pie. She set them down without speaking. Hank thanked her. He did not touch his pie. He did not touch his coffee. He folded his hands again and he looked at me. "I want you to come to my shop tomorrow morning. There is something I want to show you." I followed his maroon Ford F-150 the next morning at 7:00 a.m. I had slept maybe 2 hours in our empty bed. I had eaten a piece of toast and drunk a glass of orange juice and showered and put on the same clothes I had worn the day before because all of my other clothes still seemed to belong to the man I had been on Monday. Hank had given me the address before he dropped me back at my Subaru at the marina the night before. He had written it on the back of a Tully's Diner receipt and pressed it into my hand and told me to be there at 7 sharp because he did not believe in starting work after the sun came up. The address was a warehouse on Ohio Street in the old First Ward, a part of Buffalo that had once been the center of the city's grain trade, and was now a quiet neighborhood of converted industrial buildings, brick smokestacks, and the kind of streets that get plowed last in winter. The warehouse was a 2-story brick building with the words DOS WOODWORKS painted on the side in white letters that had been there a long time. Hank's truck was already in the lot. 3 other vehicles were parked beside it: a green sedan, a small white pickup, a motorcycle covered with a tarp. Hank met me at the side door and led me into the shop. I had never been inside a real woodworking shop before. The smell hit me first. Cedar and oak and walnut and the slightly sweet smell of linseed oil and the cleaner, sharper smell of sawdust, freshly cut that morning. The shop was high-ceilinged and well lit by windows running the length of the south wall. There were workbenches arranged in a long row down the middle. There were band saws and table saws and lathes and planers arranged along the walls. There were clamps hanging on pegboards. There were stacks of lumber against the back wall sorted by species and grade. 3 men were already at work when I arrived. The first was a wiry man in his late 30s with tattoos along the backs of his hands who was sanding a long piece of curved walnut with a precision that suggested he had been at it for a long time. The second was a heavy-set black man in his 50s wearing safety glasses who was running a piece of oak through a planer. The third was a younger man, maybe 25, with the careful posture of someone who has recently relearned how to stand, who was assembling what looked like the frame of a small writing desk. None of them looked up when we walked in. They glanced, registered Hank, registered me, and went back to their work. The respect in the room was the respect of men who did not waste it on greetings. "Holden, this is Marcus, Donovan, and Ezra. Gentlemen, this is Holden. He is here to look around this morning. He may or may not be back." The 3 of them nodded toward me in turn. Marcus, the wiry one, said morning. Donovan said nothing. Ezra, the youngest, gave me a small, careful smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Hank walked me to a small office in the back corner of the shop. There was a wooden desk that he had clearly built himself, a filing cabinet, 2 chairs, a coffee maker on a side table that was already on. He poured 2 cups and handed one to me. We sat down. "I started this shop in 1971 with my father. We built custom kitchen cabinetry for 50 years. We were good at it. We made a comfortable living. My son Theo worked with me here from the time he was 12 until the year before he died. In 1994, I closed the cabinet business and changed what this shop does, because after I lost Theo, I could not stand to keep doing the work he and I had done together without him. I made a decision instead to use this shop to do something he might have been proud of. For 31 years now, I have run an apprenticeship program for men who have come to a hard stop in their lives. Marcus came to me out of state prison in 2019. Donovan came to me out of a homeless shelter in 2016. Ezra came to me last March straight from a 30-day rehab program. What I do here, Holden, is teach men a trade. That is the part you can see. The part you cannot see is the other thing I do, which is give a man a place to be at 7 o'clock in the morning for as many mornings as it takes for him to remember that being somewhere at 7 o'clock in the morning is a reason. I am not a therapist. I am not a social worker. I am not a man of religion in any organized sense. I'm a furniture maker who lost his only son, and I have decided over many years that the small thing I can do with the time I have left is to put a chisel in the hand of a man who has been told by the world that he is finished, and to stand next to him at a workbench until he believes otherwise. He took a sip of his coffee. He looked at me over the rim of the cup. "You are not the kind of man I usually take on. The men in my shop have come out of prison or rehab or shelters. You came out of a corner office on the 4th floor of a logistics company. Your hands are soft. You have never held a hand plane. You have never sharpened a chisel. You do not know which side of an oak board the grain runs on. By the metrics that have organized my workshop for 31 years, you do not fit. But I walked down a pier last night and I found a man on a bench, and I have learned across many Tuesdays that the bench does not care whether your collapse was loud or quiet or whether it happened in a courtroom or a conference room. The bench takes all comers, and the men who get back up off the bench do not get back up by themselves. So I am offering you what I offer the others, a place to be at 7 o'clock in the morning, a trade you can learn, a small wage, not a large one. The use of a room above the shop that I rent to apprentices for $200 a month while they get their feet under them, and the time you need to figure out what your second life is going to look like." I looked at him. I looked through the office window at Marcus and Donovan and Ezra working at their benches in the morning light. I looked at the shop, at the lumber stacked against the wall, at the tools hanging on the pegboard, at the long rectangle of weak November sunlight falling across the concrete floor. "Why me, Hank? Honestly. Because last night you sat on a bench, and tonight you would have sat on that bench again, and the Tuesday after that you would have sat on it again, and I have run out of patience for watching that particular thing happen to men who could be standing at a workbench instead. I am not saying you are saved. I am not making any predictions about you. I am offering you a door. You can walk through it or you cannot. If you walk through it, the first lesson is at 7:30 tomorrow morning, and you will sharpen a chisel until you know what sharp means." I told him I would be there at 7:30. I will not tell you that the months that followed were easy. They were not. I cut myself the first week, a long, shallow slice across the meat of my left thumb that required 4 stitches at the urgent care on Elmwood Avenue. I broke 3 chisels by trying to use them wrong. I ruined a $40 piece of cherry by sanding through the veneer on a tabletop because I did not yet understand how thin a veneer is. Hank did not yell at me. He showed me again how to do the thing I had failed at, and he stood next to me while I did it. And when I finally did it correctly, he nodded once and walked away. Cordelia and Sawyer started coming to the shop on Saturdays after Christmas. Cordelia came first. She was 14 and had spent the first weeks of the separation furious with both of her parents in the particular way that teenage daughters can be furious, which is to say with stillness and short sentences and long pauses. She came to the shop on a Saturday in January because Marlena had a work conflict, and the alternative was her grandmother's house in Amherst. And she chose, with the calculation of a 14-year-old, the lesser of 2 awkward options. I gave her a sanding block and a piece of scrap maple and showed her how to sand with the grain. She sanded for 45 minutes without speaking. At the end of those 45 minutes, she looked up at me and said, "Dad, this is actually kind of nice." She started coming every Saturday after that. By March, she was helping me build a small bookshelf for her bedroom at her mother's house. By May, she had her own apron hanging on a peg by the door with her name written on the inside in Hank's careful block letters. Sawyer was harder. He was 10, and he was angry the way 10-year-old boys are angry, which is to say not with his mouth but with his shoulders. He came to the shop the first time in February with his sister, and he refused to touch any of the tools. He sat on a stool by the window and read a book about marine biology and would not look at me. I did not push him. Hank did not push him. The 3rd Saturday he came, Hank walked over to him without saying anything and set a small piece of pine and a pocket knife on the workbench next to him. He told Sawyer that if he wanted to whittle, the wood and the knife were his, and if he did not want to whittle, that was also fine. Sawyer picked up the knife on the 4th Saturday. By August, he had carved a small wooden whale that he gave me for my 50th birthday, and that whale is sitting on the windowsill in the room above the shop where I am writing this to you. It is now June of 2026. 7 months have passed since the night on the pier. I'm still living above the Das Woodworks shop. The rent is $200 a month, the same rate Hank has charged his apprentices since 1994. I am the senior apprentice in the shop now. Marcus moved on in March to start his own small cabinet business in Lackawanna. Donovan is still here. Ezra is still here. We have taken on 2 new men since the spring, a 42-year-old named Reuben who came to us out of a divorce and a long bout of unemployment, and a 28-year-old named Calvin who came to us out of a treatment program in Rochester. I help Hank with the books on Friday afternoons. He has begun teaching me what he calls the second trade, which is the part of his work that has nothing to do with wood. Marlena and I are divorced now. The papers were finalized in April. We are civil with each other at the handoffs. I do not know if there will ever be more than that. I do not need there to be. I have my children every other weekend and every Wednesday evening, and on those evenings I cook them dinner in the apartment above the shop, and Hank joins us about half the time, and Sawyer has started calling him Grandpa Hank without anyone asking him to. I want to ask you something before I finish. Have you ever been told you were worthless by the person who was supposed to know your worth best? Have you ever been fired by a company you had given your best years to? Have you ever sat somewhere late at night on a bench or in a parked car or at a kitchen table and felt the weight of a day that had taken everything from you? If you have, I want you to know that I see you. And I want you to know that sometimes a stranger walks down a pier in the middle of the night. Sometimes a hand lands on a shoulder. Sometimes 7 plain words are spoken in the wind. Stand up. You're not done yet, son. The bench is not the end of the story. It is the place where someone finds you. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reached something in you, hit the like button and share it with someone who is sitting on their own bench tonight. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one.